All right, so what, 350 more and we can get Manscaped to sponsor us? I can do a plug for Manscaped.
Is that what you need? 500 to get sponsored?
Episode, right?
I think it's like 500 listens per episode, and I could talk about my clean-shaven balls.
Yeah.
Let's get there. Come on.
Come on, people. Share
What
it.
else? What else do we got to do?
If you want to hear about Dan's clean-shaven balls,
A podcast about bourbon and the ones who drink it. This is Bourbon Matters. Welcome to Bourbon Matters. I'm Jake.
I'm gonna have us lose some listeners this week.
And I'm Gold Eagle Jake. Why is that, Dan?
Talking about our favorite thing, politics.
Policy.
No, same, almost the exact same. A lot of same letters in the same organization.
that is true.
Why are we talking about policy?
Because there's a lot of talk about tariffs, Dan. And we were kind of wondering what the impact of those tariffs would be on the whiskey market in general in America. Thought it would be an interesting thing to talk about.
Sounds political.
It's not, Dan. It's just about taxes.
About taxes. Our favorite thing to talk about. So, it's Trump's tariff plan that he talks about, which is like a 10 to 20% on tariffs that would be imposed on everything except for China would have higher tariffs, I believe.
Yes, I read the current proposal is a flat 20% tariff on all imports, and China's would be 60%.
Okay. So basically then what would happen was that if it's a flat 20% on everything, then all your Scotch, your Irish, your Japanese, your Indian whiskeys would all have 20% tax to import them into the U.S., which is going to raise their prices by quite a bit. Mm-hmm. As there's going to be more tax paid by the importer / distributor.
I think the importer is, different. Though it doesn't have to be, I don't think. But I think most of the time it is.
I don't know that side at all. We don't do anything.
Some of it is different. Some of it is the same. But usually you have a company that is strictly in charge of just importing and getting it over the seas to the distributor.
Mm.
So I don't know in that case then if the importer pays an import tax and then the distributor still has the excise tax. That I don't know of. So I'm not sure if the tariff goes...
I think they're two separate taxes.
Right, they are two separate taxes. So I'm not sure if the importer then picks up that. So that means they're going to need a bigger cut, and that's going to take margins away from everybody else. So then everyone else is going to raise their prices. And at the end of the day, the people that make the least off of it, which is basically the producer in the store that sells it, would make the least amount off of it. Including selling things for a higher price. So, if that were to happen, and there were to be a 20%, let's just call it the 20%. Obviously, it's a policy that's being talked about pre-presidential elections, so you have no idea what policies are ever going to go through anyways. But let's say there's going to be a 20% tariff on all Scotch and Irish whiskey, as well as all the other whiskeys that are imported. What is that going to do to American whiskey in the United States? Jake would be there was one of these back in 2019, 2017? There was a import tax or tariff.
Yeah, I think it was around there. Definitely no later than 2019.
Mm-hmm. What do you guys think that would mean then for American whiskey if these get taxed higher?
So I can kind of speak on that for a little bit because I do remember when I was working at the store when the tariffs were put in place, whenever it was in 2018, 2019, on any whiskeys coming in to the U.S. And I believe it was also vice versa. Anything that went out of the U.S. that same percentage had to be paid to the other countries. Because I remember Few, for example, believe it or not, the small distillery from Evanston, half their business was in Europe. They had a lot of success over in Europe. There's not a lot of brands that distribute there, and I guess for whatever reason they caught on when they originally did. And I remember their owner Paul telling us how their $35 bottle here sells for $80 in Europe, and people still pay it just because they want American whiskey. It worked both ways, and it was very interesting because there were certain brands of Scotch. I'm going to talk mostly about Scotch because that's what I remember most being impacted. Certain brands of Scotch that jumped up 30%, and there were other brands that never changed the whole time. And there were also some brands had these huge shipments, these huge dumps into the US right before the tariffs hit. And that's why they never increased. So they saw it coming. The brands that had the inventory and also had the distributors here that were willing to take on that inventory, they stocked up and filled warehouses with this stuff so that they didn't have to face those tariffs. This was an interesting time as well because this was kind of right before the bourbon really boomed and took off. So I remember a lot of my customers who were Scotch drinkers at the time. They were kind of teetering back and forth. Like, should I try bourbon? Should I get into bourbon? I don't want to because now I'm going to start collecting a whole nother thing. But a lot of them use those tariffs as their decision to get into American whiskey. So I think that kind of really helped boom. Everything kind of hit at the right time. It was like a perfect storm for the American whiskey market. So I guess the interesting thing will be how much, if at all, will this help American whiskey? Because people have already kind of, decided whether they liked it or not. I don't think there's going to be Scotch drinkers today who are going to switch to bourbon because of that, because they would have done that 4 or 5 years ago.
Yeah, they had their chance.
Right. And some of them said, F it, I don't care, I'm going to pay more. I like Scotch, or they drank through what they had, or they just went for the brands that didn't really see much of an increase.
Yes, that one of my kind of points or questions to you was going to be, did you see a bunch of panic buying before the price increases hit?
There were some panic buying. There were people that said, hey, I'm buying 6 bottles today because I don't want to have to deal with these tariffs. And nobody really knows. Nobody did know what was going to increase, when it was going to increase. A lot of people don't realize too that most of this stuff is already here in the United States. So right when the tariffs took place, it's not like we raised the prices on everything 20%. It just depends on when their next shipment came into the country.
Yeah, right. And there's some sort of lag there because it's got to go through the whole system. Watch our liquor store 101 episode where we talk about the 3-tier system if you want to learn more about that. But yeah, I mean, my other big point was that this is probably going to result in people being driven into American whiskey. I would think that if you're presented with a price hike in one option, not the other, you would go for the one that doesn't have the price hike. Which, I think
might be.
Yeah, go ahead.
Keep going. No, I was just going to say, this might be how American single malt can take off.
That was going to be my question to the group is, do you think that's the alternative to Scotch drinkers that are scared off by a price hike? I know it's not. There's a lot of difference between Scotch and American single malt. Not saying bad or
I
good.
think,
Just
I
that
th-
it's different. But
yeah, I think it'll get people to taste some American single malt and maybe buy a bottle here or there. It is different, so who knows if they stick to it. But Dan, you were shaking your head. What do you think about that?
Well, no, we've talked about this at work a decent amount already. Um, there's good and bad. So yeah, so this is going to make scotch and things like that more expensive. I think I'm closer with you. I don't think Scotch drinkers are going to switch to American single malt because the flavor profile is completely different. Um, the thing that we are more concerned about on the other side is this is just a 20% import tariff. It's not going to make our bourbon more expensive overseas. However, when you talked about the 2019 or 2017, whatever it was both ways because normally what happens is
Right.
when we put a tariff on, then let's just talk about Europe. Europe put a tariff on then too for us for exporting, for them to import American whiskey. And I guess that's where the concern lies. So if we think that it's going to slow down whiskey sale or Scotch sales in America, Scotch, Irish, yada yada yada. If we think that's going to slow down those style of sales, that's fine because then it's going to push more people to drink bourbon. But now, let's say uh, Europe's not going to buy nearly as much Buffalo Trace product as what they're used to because it's going to be more expensive for them to put Buffalo Trace on the shelf. What's Buffalo Trace going to do? They're going to just not export it and leave it more here. And then what happens when I've talked about it. We've talked about it on the show too about this whiskey glut where all these people have really expanded what they're making, and now there's a lot of this stuff available. What does that do to large, medium, and small craft distillers? And then on top of that, on that research project that I did, when you look at your large, medium, and small craft distillers, your large has been increasing their sales year over year. Their biggest growth area has been from exporting. So now you have your really big craft distillers that aren't going to be exporting as much. So what are they going to try and do is sell more locally and in their home states and in their home country. And what does that do for the other craft distillers? So that's kind of the concern that would be on our side is, yes, I think it's going to drive more people to drink to bourbon, but then I also think more of the hard to find bourbon starts to flood some more of the market, which then I think hurts some of the other hurts smaller distilleries and craft distilleries.
yeah,
So
I mean,
I think that speeds up that process.
yeah, from the consumer standpoint, that's beneficial depending on if that's the kind of whiskey you're looking for. Um, but yeah, it definitely is not going to help. That scenario that we've talked about quite extensively now, where the craft distilleries have a pretty decent chance of being pushed out of the market just from the sheer volume that's coming in the next few years. And a scenario like this, like you kind of pointed out, Dan, is like going to accelerate that. And we can see that maybe a year or maybe multiple years earlier than we normally would have.
Right. And it's not saying it's gonna be like an overnight change because like some of the stuff, like okay, let's say the Buffalo Trace stuff that everyone hunts, the Weller, the Taylor, the Eagle, all that stuff's gonna be available and a lot more of the Heaven Hill stuff's gonna be available and special releases are gonna be available. But at what point are people still deciding that I don't need to buy the Weller because it's always available. Do I want to try this other thing instead? And I think the easiest way to see that is with Heaven Hill Bib. It's almost impossible not to find it on sale for their 7-year bottle and bond because it's everywhere now. They've got enough stock of it and it sits. But are people going to be buying more of that than craft and it cuts into craft sales? It's definitely going to have an impact on that. Now, how much it has is yet to be seen if it does happen. But it could have a very ill effect on the craft market.
Isn't it funny? how that works. As soon as it's available, people don't want it anymore.
I know why that would be that
which,
way, Jake.
which, yes, the Heaven Hill Bib and Elijah Toasted, those are great examples because they're still great bottles. People love them, but it's just so funny how people just, oh yeah, I can find that anywhere, so I don't want it.
Yeah. Well, I don't need to get it today. I can get it later, and then it's just keep on
No,
buying
yeah,
different things.
hmm yeah,
So
but yep, same thing's gonna happen with all the Buffalo Trace.
yeah.
But yeah, so going back to the previous tariffs, I know there was also some brands that kind of worked with the distributor to each lower their margins so that the price didn't change. And then there was also some brands that the price increased by so much that we just completely stopped carrying it. And people would come in angry, and Bowmore, for example, I think they took a price increase and the tariff increase, and it went from like $50 for their 12-year up to like $80 or $90. And people would come in
Wow.
upset, like, how come you don't have Bowmore? Like, every store has that. And I'm like, well, the price is now $90 a bottle. If you want me to order it, I can order it, because of all these tariffs and price increases. And so I think we're going to see some fluctuation. It's going to be a little shock for some people. Well, who even knows if these take place, these tariffs, right?
Right.
Because it's all pre-election.
One, it's got to be a certain person elected, and then which is a 50-50 chance right now, from what it sounds like. And then two, it's that policy has to go through.
Well, so my understanding on this is that the Treasury Department controls all of these tariffs unilaterally from Congress. So
Sounds about right. The department
the
in charge of
executive
money.
branch basically gets to decide this without any kind of congressional input, which is a little interesting. I'm honestly pretty surprised that Congress allows that to happen, but
Really?
at the same time, not. But so I went through the current harmonized tariff schedule for the United States, which is from the Treasury Department's website. Brief overview on this, in case anybody doesn't know. There's a bunch of different codes that, if you're importing things, you assign codes to the goods you're importing, and that's how customs kind of identifies them and make sure that you're paying the correct taxes, when they're brought into the country. So there's specific HTS codes for spirits. So just as a baseline, so people kind of understand like what we're talking about here a little bit in terms of the increases that we're going to see. So for whiskey, Scotch and Irish whiskeys have no duties right now.
Not duty.
There's
DUTY, Dan.
Okay.
There's two different tax rates, and I'm not sure how it applies, but the general duty is free, and then there's a class 2 rate that is $1.99 per proof liter for Scotch and Irish, and $2.04 per proof liter for any other whiskey, which is hilarious because they have bourbon listed under other, but why would you be importing bourbon? I don't know. Not sure. That you
Probably
shouldn't be
buyback.
possible.
It's probably buyback.
Yeah, I guess that's true. But interesting that you're gonna re-import something that otherwise would not have any kind of duty on it. But yeah, so most other whiskeys do not have any kind of duty either, which is interesting. they specifically name rye probably because of Canada. But the only like countries of origin are Irish and Scotch on the list of whiskeys, which is a little interesting. They've got rum. So rum is interesting because it's the value per proof liter that they're taxing you on. So if it's under $3 per proof liter, it's 23.7 cents per proof liter that it's taxed at. If it's over $3 per proof liter, it's free, which is a little backwards to me. Then a different tax rate for how size of the container that you're importing. Gin is free, so far basically only rum is taxed. Vodka is not taxed. Liquors and cordials are not taxed. Bitters are not taxed. Brandy is not taxed. Tequila is not taxed. So rum is discriminated against, in case anyone wants the summary of
So
the
that's why rum never
Treasury
boomed.
Department. Yeah, and I mean
That might have been the most riveting content we've ever had on the podcast.
thanks, Dan. I mean, I don't like. It's hard to quantify this, but like, basically, your cheapest rums are actually taxed higher than your good quality rums, which is really interesting to me.
So basically, to sum all that up, none of the
Buy good
taxing
rum.
and tariffs or anything really makes sense. They're just policies
Yeah.
put into place, and we just have no choice but to follow them.
Yep. So
I think we would lose more listeners if Jake keeps on going down this rabbit hole and if I start spouting off my political
hey,
opinions.
it's important to know because almost nothing is actually taxed right now. So,
Well, you could have just said that.
oh my god,
That's the problem with not doing any research until the show. But
I did the research.
it's all right. That's how we like to roll.
No, but
But anyway, so you're basically going to see an across the board 20% minimum hike on all imported alcohol, which is
that's if the orange one
If it
gets
goes
elected
through.
yes.
and if the policy goes through. This isn't happening.
Looking through these HTS codes, there's so many exceptions that I'm sure there will be carve outs, but
I think the other problem, though, that Scotch and stuff is going to have too is there's already so much price increase on Scotch and Irish whiskey recently. Mm-hmm. Like they've already had a big price increase, and I think this is really going to hurt them if they get a 20% tariff on it, because some of that stuff just got raised 15% or more in pricing. Like I remember a couple of years ago, Jake R had been wanting a bottle of Blue Spot really bad. And we got it at Sam's for a little more than retail, and you paid like $180 for it.
yeah.
Which I think was like a $150 bottle back then. And I'm like, geez, you paid a decent amount for it. And now it's a $300 bottle.
Yeah.
Two and a half years later.
Sorry, what bottle?
Blue Spot.
Blue Spot.
Oh yeah. Oh well, yeah. The spots are ridiculous. Like those all just took a money greed double in price increase. I mean, when you bought it for 180, it was still very, very hard to find, and they're still hard to find now. But because of the price, like they're not making more, they just literally doubled the price from 150 up to 300. So yeah, and those prices are probably not coming down. If they did, it would look really, really bad on Pernod Ricard, which owns the brand. Because they're the ones determining all these prices and price increases.
Mm-hmm.
But we're gonna hit a point where some of these companies are gonna have to bite the bullet, lower their price, and take back more of the market share, or else there's just gonna be way too much out there, and there's no way people are gonna keep paying.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think the other part that to Dan's comment about the recent price increases is I don't think we've even seen the implications of the bourbon price increases on Scotch, where now the barrels are worth more and probably going for higher rates that will be passed on to Scotch in like 5 to 10 years or more. It's like it's kind of a cycle
that's
that's
pretty
going to
small
continue
cost in
to.
the long term of things, though. I mean,
Well, I mean, think about how in demand bourbon barrels are right now. Like, not even just in Scotch. Like, everybody's trying to get bourbon barrels.
Yeah, I could see that going either way because we do have a surplus of bourbon being made. So there's a lot more bourbon barrels that are going to become available. But yes, you are right. The cost for a new American oak charred barrel has gone way up compared to what it was 5 years ago. So that could go either way. I think that's going to come down to what distilleries in Scotland have good relationships with these American distilleries, because a lot of them have co-owners and have just had a 100-year 50-year whatever relationship of swapping barrels and just having a home for all your bourbon barrels to go to. So I think the places that don't have those relationships set up are gonna be impacted, but I could see that going either way.
yeah, I don't see it affecting too much. I mean, new barrels, but are costing more. But I mean, the amount of whiskey that we're sitting on and those barrels is we're way out producing barrels or empty. We're way over emptying barrels right now compared to what Scotland needs.
Well,
And
now,
there's only
yes,
we're
yeah.
only going to run into a bigger problem. We talk about having a glut of whiskey. That means we're going to have a glut of whiskey barrels, which is going to be more available. Now the downside is you can't let a whiskey barrel sit forever because it does start to dry out, and then it's hard to rehydrate and get them to leak and hold a tight seal after a decent amount of time. So it's not like someone can just sit on empty bourbon barrels for a year or two and then send them over when they need them, just because they do dry out quickly.
So you're saying $1 million idea is to start a bourbon barrel smoking chip company? No liquor license needed. Finding a home for all these bourbon barrels that won't have a home.
Yeah, yeah. There's gonna be a lot. There's already people that do that. Just chunk it up.
No, I know there is.
Smoker,
Yeah,
but lots of furniture. But yeah, it's gonna be. I mean, I was reading an article that about 10 years ago, Costco used to sell Jack Daniel's barrels for like $75.
I thought they still do.
Every once in a while, but I know
Maybe-
a lot of the barrels have been. They can usually sell them more to distilleries and breweries than what that is.
Like I haven't seen that in Costco, but I have seen Jack Daniel's barrels at Home Depot.
Yeah, Lowe's and Home Depot usually get some.
They cut them in half in their planters.
Yep.
But yeah. So I don't know that. I mean, that's a whole nother conversation. Just what we'd have to get, an expert in the cooperage field or the barrel field, and someone that deals with the brokerage between used bourbon barrels and where they're going, because there are companies that just specifically do that.
Well, and I guess here's the other thing is if there is a tariff, I don't know how much is affected, but that means that the bourbon barrels getting shipped over to Scotland would now have a 20% tariff on them. So that's going to make the bourbon barrel more expensive that they're aging their Scotch in, which is then going to come back over here if the tariff's still on whenever that's ready.
Yeah, well, right.
So-
I mean,
So-
it's going to compound.
Yeah, lots of moving pieces that we didn't even think about, that the average person is never going to think about, and obviously our listeners are going to be well informed. You guys are welcome that we're talking about this and prepping you for it.
You're very
just kidding,
welcome for
but-
Jake going over how much dollars and cents rum was going to be taxed. And
Hey,
Yes.
you're very welcome for that. Listener.
Somebody's got to do the research, and it was me for
But-
this one.
But
Yeah, which
I
also
do.
means it's probably not even right.
It was right. It's from the government document. I downloaded
That
it
doesn't
and
mean it's
everything.
right. That doesn't.
It was 2024, so I'm blaming the federal government if it's wrong.
I do think this time around, compared to 2018, 2019, it's going to be a lot more unpredictable because there is a lot more moving pieces. And it's the second wave of this coming through, but it is going to be very, very interesting to see how it plays out if these tariffs do take effect.
Yeah, I mean,
And
there's
I know you're not
a
totally
pretty
on
high
board
chance
with
this is
this.
all going to be
Worthless.
What do you mean? What do you mean? All politics are worthless. They're all worthless pieces of garbage.
Yeah, I mean, we don't know, but my bold take will be that this is if this goes into place, it's the make or break moment for American single malt.
Yeah, if American single malt, if this happens and American single malt can't take off, then
it never will.
No.
Yeah. Scale back
I
production. If you're not a Courage and Conviction, a Westland, a Westward, somebody who has already proven themselves in American single malt, Stranahan, then get out of that field. There's too many bourbon distilleries that are making great bourbon that are also trying to make single malt. So I think this is a big test for that entire category of whiskey.
Yep.
Yeah.
Definitely.
It'll be interesting. I mean, it's an interesting thought to start thinking about, just knowing that the market's already changing quite a bit, which we've talked about. It could really, it could either help or put an end to the whiskey boom and be completely done. So it'll be interesting. Bottom line, if it does, if we were to have a big tariff on liquor and things come on, and you like certain smaller distilleries, that medium, large, small craft distilleries, the way you keep them around is by buying their stuff instead of the Weller Special Reserves that sit on the shelf all the time for $35. But I still think it's, even if this does happen, it's going to be a years until we start having to worry about some places closing doors. And I think the first places that are going to feel it are going to be your sourced whiskey places that aren't making their own stuff.
Yeah, I think you're actually going to get a lot of the, like, let's call them experienced bourbon drinkers actually going to craft distilleries if all of the, allocated or hard to find stuff becomes readily available. Because, like Jake said, it's interesting how the thrill kind of evaporates once it's easily available. And then it's like, oh, what else is new and interesting? Well, a lot of the craft stuff is. So that's, I think, where a lot of those people will go. But a lot of the entry level people will probably go towards those, tater staples. Because everybody says they're
let's
good,
be clear.
so
let's separate.
why not start there?
Let's separate the tater staples from, like, your hyper aged, dare I say, George T. Stagg, William LaRue Weller, Heaven Hill 18-year, Parker's Heritage. Stuff like that will always be in demand, will probably always be hard to find. But, will you get sick of Eagle Rare 10-year if that's all you drink and it's on the shelf anytime you walk into a liquor store? Yes, you probably will want to taste something different and expand your palate.
You're going to start making old fashions out of Eagle Rare.
No, it does not hold up in an old fashioned. Just like it doesn't hold up as a neat
90
pour.
proof doesn't, 94 proof doesn't do well.
90. But so, all right, so this might be a dumb question, and pardon me, maybe I should know this, maybe I shouldn't, but let's use Bacta for example, who owns a chateau in France. and owns all their Armagnac already, are there still? How does that work if they're going to import barrels and
Okay.
bottle it here?
So first of all, just know that there's no such thing as a stupid question. There are a lot.
There's going to be some listeners who are like, Jake, how do you not know this? You're in the industry.
There's no stupid
Maybe
questions.
it's common knowledge, maybe it's not. But yes, that is my question.
There's just a lot of inquisitive idiots.
Yeah.
Are
I
you?
don't think ownership matters. I think
No.
it's
Is it being imported into the state?
Yeah,
Is it coming from a different? Is it being imported in from a different country? Yes, it's included there.
mm-hmm.
No matter how it comes, it'd be the same way.
So Raj better get a bunch of boats and ship that shit over. ASAP.
Yeah, I mean, well, also they're going to be, you would still you'd want to import it before the tariffs, obviously, but it would probably make a lot. I don't know. I mean, that's a math question for Raj. Like, would it make more sense to import the barrels, pay the 20% on the barrels? Because what do you value the barrels at? You don't know what's in there. You don't know how much liquid's in there. Like, are they going to measure the weight of every barrel and make sure what they're getting bottled is, because couldn't you use the price, the original price of the barrel? Or I don't know. There's a lot of...
It looks like they tax based on volume.
The proof gallon.
So
okay.
Or proof
So
liters.
you would have to
But
measure out
if
then
if the
and
if the
figure
tariff
out
is 20%
how much is
flat,
in
it
all
doesn't
those.
matter. It doesn't matter how much. And
Yeah, you would have to.
Yeah.
If you're bringing barrels over, you got to get the proof of the barrel, and then you'd have to re-weigh it. Now the problem is the weight, the barrel. So on average for us, a Kelvin Cooperage Char 3 barrel weighs about 105 pounds empty.
well, these aren't barrels; these are like casks, right?
Well, yeah, they're
Hogsheads
bigger.
and things
So
like that.
we can say 150, maybe
Yeah.
200.
But that's the weight beforehand, and then you have your loss that's evaporated. Then when you dump your barrel, you see how much weight by volume you have left. Now, if you would just take that and subtract off the full weight of the barrel minus
Right.
there's still going to be liquor that's caught in the wood that you're not getting out.
Yeah,
for
so-
about 4 or 5 pounds.
Yeah,
per
so
barrel
that makes
that's gonna
sense,
be
'cause
trapped
it's-
that you're not getting back. So, you'd probably weigh the barrel and just say, okay, it was this. It weighed that. You have to keep track of how much it weighed when it went in. So you'd say, okay, there's this much. Then it weighs this much now. So that means it's lost.
Well, you're talking about normal tax on the excise.
Well,
tax,
the tariff tax is volume
the
of
same thing.
liquid, right? So it's
Volume
based
of
off the
liquid.
same thing. So
Right.
I was originally thinking, like, are they setting a price for the bottles and then paying up, whatever the bottles are going to import in as price per bottle. But it's all based on volume. So
Yeah, it's all based on.
it doesn't really
price
matter.
per-
So if that's the case, they're probably going to bottle it because it's a lot cheaper to ship a pallet of bottles than these big casks.
Yeah.
if there's a difference, but if it's a flat 20%, it won't matter. But we don't know. We'll have to wait and see.
Yeah. It will be interesting. It definitely will have an effect on the market if that were to come true. Could be good, could be bad. It's hard to tell. You don't know how consumers are going to respond to that.
Which standpoint or viewpoint you're going to take. For the American consumer, it might be great because your bourbon might become readily available, and
if you like
drive price
American
down.
whiskey. For the American consumer, like me, who likes Scotch as well, and Calvados and Armagnac,
it'll be brutal.
It's not going to be fun. Not to say I don't like American whiskey. I love American whiskey, but I do like other stuff, and I don't like when I realize I'm paying an extra 20% just because somebody said we're going to increase the tax on this. it's bad enough when price increases happen because distilleries need to raise their price, but for a tax, I mean, come on.
Burn it all
Not
down.
good, Dan. Not good.
Burn it all to the ground.
Makes me want to burn this motherfucker down.
Whenever I hear taxes, I just think of, or whenever I hear this stuff, I think of Ron Swanson in Parks and Rec when he's in the budget meeting, just going slash it. All right. Well,
quick transition, really quick. If we're wrapping up, did you guys listen to last week's episode about Bacta or no?
You cut out there.
Yeah, you broke up a little bit there.
Did you guys listen to last week's episode that I did solo about Bacta?
No,
I listened to part of it because I
saw that there
double-checked
wasn't
if
a
I
video
actually
for
had
it.
to edit it.
There was no video for it because the room we were in didn't really have a cool background, and we were all sitting around in a circle, so it would have just been me the whole time. And it was also really bad service, so we kept kind of chopping in and out. So then we just decided let's kill the video, and it worked much better after that. But yeah, I was gonna ask for feedback. I figured maybe you'd listen to it because you weren't on it.
I knew for a fact Dan wasn't going to. I should have done my homework and listened to it.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, yeah. So like, I don't listen to
podcasts.
I do listen to podcasts, but I don't listen to ours because I don't like listening to my own voice. Most people don't listening to their own voice. So when you guys do one without me, yeah. When you guys do an episode without me, like I'll listen to it. But yeah, it was a fun one. We'll have to do another follow up once those blends come. I was just gonna see if you had any thoughts or questions or comments about that. I don't know if we had any listener comments, but apologize to the listeners for no video and leave some feedback and comments on it.
I'll tell you what.
That was is that a custom 1928 blend that you guys did?
Yeah, so we did we did 6 different custom 1928 blends. 3 of them are for 2 private clients. 3 of them are coming to the store. So
nice.
I'm not going to repeat what we had to do because it was in the last episode, but very cool process. You guys need to go listen to it, Jake and Dan. But we're gonna do more.
Who hasn't?
Yeah, we're gonna do more 1928 blends. That was just the first 3. We want to make it like an 18-part series. That was cool.
One of my favorite whiskeys of the year last year.
Yeah, same.
It's so good. So yeah, I'm excited to try those. That'll be really cool.
Nice.
And next time, I hopefully won't have a wedding, and I'll be able to go.
Hopefully.
I'll listen to it when I drive up on the 22nd for the Scotch tasting.
Okay, Dan.
Speaking of, if people want to go to some of the tastings at Gold Eagle, where can they find out about these, Jake?
They can go to goldeaglewine.com/events. They can download our app and go to our events section on our app. And follow us on Instagram at Gold Eagle Wine, Facebook at Gold Eagle Spirits to see everything that we have going on, including our daily deliveries. Where can we find Bourbon Matters?
You can find Bourbon Matters on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, or any other podcast platform for audio only. If you want to watch it on video, you can watch us on Spotify and YouTube. Follow us on Instagram at Bourbon Matters or on Facebook. Like, subscribe, comment, share with your friends. Make sure we get to 500 listens per episode so Dan can talk about manscaping. Yeah, I think that's it, right?
Yeah, and I guess as a PSA, if you're concerned about tariffs or any of these things, make sure to go and vote If you live in Illinois, no reason to, because your vote doesn't matter. If you live in a battleground state, make sure to vote because your vote actually does matter. But if you're not in one of those battleground states, just don't even worry about it because this is America and your vote doesn't matter.
Thanks for that uplifting message, Dan.
Great advice,
It's all
Dan.
gonna
Great
burn.
advice.
It's all gonna burn, boys.
There goes 10% of our listeners.
All right, guys. Well, cheers.
Cheers.
Cheers.